Our goal in this assignment is to practice some of what we've already learned about Excel spreadsheets, but also to do some formulas that involve logical decision making. So I'm using the example of a grade book again simply because it's something most students are familiar with, but this could be information about income for your company, or it could be some numerical test data that engineers have taken to make some decisions about the strength or some sort of test conditions for a design. So in this gradebook example, you'll notice if you look at the sample data that I have in here, many students, to fill in an average, will say, well, if there's 3 grades, I should add them together and divide by 3. But if you look closely, you'll see that this appears to be, these columns appear to be 2 smaller, perhaps quizzes or assignments, and then a column of grades that might be out of 100 points. So we need to have a little bit more information in how we're going to do this average. So I specifically wanted to create this file so that you would have to insert a column. So I'm going to click here when I get this side arrow. So I'm going to highlight this row, and then I'm going to go find the insert. And now I've got a little bit smaller window, but you're going to find insert somewhere across your ribbon. And when you do the pull down menu on insert, you get a choice to insert an entire sheet or just some individual cells. Here, because I selected horizontally, it's going to give me a choice to insert rows, plural, and I only need to do this once. So click once and I'll insert a row. So you notice that it moved everything down. It did not delete any of my information. And the reason I wanted to do that is to put in the points possible here. So I intended this to be a quiz worth 15 points, this a quiz worth 20 points, and this a test worth 100 points. So I'm going to type the label points possible here with a colon, and it doesn't fit very nicely, but if I select that cell and then I go up and choose Rate Justify, since that previous cell was open, that will work just fine to put points possible there. All right, so now I've got some information about how I should compute my average, apparently. So I need to put a formula in this column. So let's think how we would do this. You guys know, you've heard this all the time, that you take your total points divided by the total points possible. So notice that each student's scores are going to move down the spreadsheet, but the points possible stay fixed. So this is a good chance for us to review the concept of relative cell addresses and absolute. So you'll see what I mean as we enter a formula in this first cell. So remember that formulas always begin with an equal sign. And then I can use formulas here if I want to get the sum formula, or once you start knowing the names of these common formulas, you can just type them. Or of course we also have a formula ribbon, so we can see that those formulas are available to us several different places. So what I want to do is take the sum, and I'm just going to type sum, parentheses, and the sum of these 3 cells, and then I'm going to close the sum formula. That would be the total of the points that the student has earned, and then I'm going to divide by, and then I'm going to divide by the sum of the points possible. So I'm going to type SUM, or you could go get it from a menu and open the parentheses, and then I'm going to click and drag through these 3, and of course you can see it would work just as easily if we had 38 scores as it does for 3. And then I close the parenthesis, and now this will give us an average but as a decimal. So then I'm going to change it to a percent, I'm going to do multiply by 100. Your other choice would be to leave it as a decimal and then use one of the auto formats to change it to a percent, but I don't like seeing the percent sign there, so I prefer multiplying by 100 so it stays as a number. All right, and now if I copied this down, we would have a problem in that the points possible would always move down a row as well. So we don't want the points possible to change. So this formula is not going to work. It works here for for row number 3, but if I drag down, let's see why this isn't going to work. You can see something suspicious here, that the percentages seem to get higher. Well, why is that? Because if I click in this cell, you can see that the points possible have moved down to row 3, and the points possible should still always be in row 2. So that definitely cannot be relative addresses. So I'm going to go back and correct my formula before I copy it down the list. So the sum of the points is relative. When I go down to Robert Brady, he should get the numbers from row 4, whereas my points possible is coming from row 3. But notice that the points possible are going to stay up here in row 2. So that's called an absolute address. And how we want to do that to make it stay fixed is we put a $sign before the column and a $sign before the row. So just use your cursor to click in there and to make it an absolute address rather than a relative. In other words, it's going to stay fixed. And we'll see how that works now. I'm going to click on the corner of the cell and drag it down. And now we'll find out if it works. Now at least they're all under 100%. So let's click on Robert Brady's average here. And you'll notice that his points possible are in row 4, but the points possible are still in row 2. So his total points are relative, but the points possible are absolute. All right. Well, how can we find the average, the class average on assignment 1? That one we could just use our average formula. But if we did that, so shortcuts aren't always so easy. Notice what it assumes is it takes the entire column. So is that actually what I want to average? No. The 15 should not be part of that average. Well, I can just grab that bar and drag it down, or I could have just typed. I could have just typed average and then put C3 colon C8. So remember that the points possible should not be included in the class average. All right, and again, we'll talk about some more formatting later. Again, we don't have to repeat the process in the next 2 columns because we can just click and drag this across. All right, can we go all the way across and average the averages? Can we just go across and do the average of the averages? So that would depend on your purpose. You can think about that a bit more. I am not going to average the averages. All right, so I guess I'm not too sure why. I don't want you to think that that would be a bad thing to average the averages. There's no reason I couldn't just drag that across to see the class overall average. That would work just fine. Okay, these cells that have so many decimal places, let's select them, and you could do this. You could select an entire column except that it's got some text at the top. So I'm just going to select, and notice if you think you might add some more students to your class later, you could highlight more cells, I believe. And now let's go to our home ribbon. And there's a built-in shortcut here if you watch what happens with the number of decimal places. So here it's adding decimal places, and here the arrow goes the other way, and it's reducing the number of decimal places. So that's one quick and easy way to format here, so you're not distracted by that many decimal places. So I'll highlight those cells, and maybe we'll even just go to 1 decimal place for a grade. That's really completely your choice. And there are other ways to do the formatting as well. All right. So we haven't made any logical decisions yet. Those were just mathematical formulas. So now we want to think what's going to happen here depending on the average that you have in the class. You know that what we're interested in is what letter grade will you get. So notice that over here I've already typed in almost completely a list of our letter grade scale. And it has to be done in order So you'll have to fill in here, when do you get an A plus? You can type a 98 in that cell. And how can you get an F? Well, you might be tempted to say anything from 50% and above is an F. But what if a student, mathematically, we hope it doesn't happen realistically, but what if a student actually had 10% or 2%? So the lowest cutoff for an F should actually start at 0. So you'll need to put those in so that we have our letter grade cutoffs. And what's very important, this is called a lookup table. And what's very important is that it goes from smallest to largest, smallest to largest. So now we want Excel to look at this cell, 71.9, and look at the list and say, well, 71.9 is bigger than 70, greater than or equal to 70, but it is less than 72. So we would want, this should be a D here, I'm going to fix that. That'll be fixed by the time you guys open the cell. So I'm just going to type these without starting my video over. Those should have been D and D plus. Sorry. Okay. So I want the grade here to end up to be a D minus. This guy has 89.6 right now. So that would be more than 87, but less than 90. So we would want this letter grade to be a B. And you might say, well, if you only have a few students, why not just type those in? But of course, the point is, if we were doing this for a college lecture hall, we might have 350 students. So we don't want to look these each up. So we want to do a formula and then replicate it down the column. So this is called a lookup formula. And I'm going to go to the Formulas tab. And under our choices here, and now again, your ribbon might look different. I've narrowed my window a bit. So you're going to look up for the list that says look up, do the pull down, and there's so many formulas here, you're just going to get a basic idea of some of the choices. So I'm going to go down to do a lookup formula. So when I choose lookup, it gives me, let me just drag this window up here a bit. It gives you information about your choices. So we're going to choose this first one where we're going to look up the value of a value and then find out where it fits in a vector. A vector is just an ordered list of terms in Excel. And then we're going to tell it what result we want to put in. So this first choice is the format we want to look up for our lookup table. I'm going to drag my window again here a little bit. So the lookup value is what are you looking at? So we're going to look at that Carol Hardkey's average. So I'm going to click in that cell. And the lookup value is what am I comparing it to? So in my lookup vector, I want to compare it to the numbers 0 through 98. So I click and drag. And when I let go, that pops into the lookup vector. And then the result vector, depending on where my average fit, depending on where F3 fits into this list, I want it to give me the letter grade from this vector. So the vector, it's a vector because it has an order from smallest to largest. So I just click and drag on the grade vector. And when I click OK, hopefully, it is going to give me the grade of D minus. Now we've got only one problem. If we copy this down, notice that our lookup vector is always in the same place and our grade result is always in the same place. So if we copied this down, we would have big troubles here. So we need to make these absolute addresses. So we can't just copy it down unless we put in all of our dollar signs here because our lookup is staying where it is fixed. So it is staying in these absolute positions. So I need a dollar sign before the cell letter, before the column letter, and before the row number. So I'm clicking in 8 different spots here because my grade scale is staying in the same place. The lookup value is going to be going down to row 4 and then down to row 5. So notice that I didn't, in my lookup value here, in my lookup value, I didn't put dollar signs in F3 because in the next one I want it to be F4. So I'm going to click and drag down. And should I do it for the class average too? Sure, why not? What's the class average grade? Okay, now I might be highly suspicious of this. So let's do some test values here and we'll see if we've got this working. So let's give me 50%. We know that this is a 15-point quiz, so I'm going to change this to a 7.5, and I'm going to give me 10 out of 20 and 50 out of 100. And my average turned out to be 50, and I get a letter grade of F. Okay? It looks like we have a nice variety of scores here. So you could check to see whether they work out. You could choose some values that you know. You can look at your value here, 88.9. Does it fit where it should be? Does the person get a B? Not high enough to get a B+. So I think that my grade scale is working nicely. All right, we've got a lot more things, and by the way, we could do a lot of formatting. So for example, I think that I would prefer to have some space here, so I could select all of column G, go to the Home tab and do centering of those values. Numerical values work best if they're right justified. But the other ones, it's up to you where you want to put those. Your column headings, for example, you might choose to center those. So lots of different choices that you could make for formatting. I still want to talk about some more decision making. So let's give another column here and let's decide if this is whether the students pass. So you have to redo this unit if you do not get a C or higher. So right now it looks like we've got 2 of these folks who are failing the class. So how am I going to decide whether they pass or fail? Well, let's go back to our formulas. And our topic for this assignment is making some decisions. So I'm going to choose a logical decision, and I'm going to say if. So many purposes that you can use an if for, and there's a lot of different choices here. So the function, when you choose that function, it gives you a nice little format to tell you some hints here. So my logical test, I want to take my average. So I'm going to click on that cell. That's what I'm testing. And my decision was, and I could have done this with the letter grade as well, but the number I think is easier. I said that we had to have a C or higher. So look at our grade scale. So we have to have a 79 or higher. So my logical test is going to say, does F3 contain an average that is greater than, hit the greater than symbol, or equal to, and those could be in either order, by the way, greater than or equal to, and I want to put 79 there. And I could have gotten the 79 by clicking on this cell, but I would have needed to put in the dollar signs. So I'm happy just typing in 79. And if that is true, what do I want to put in the cell? I want to put in text. So I want to put in, so I'm going to use quotations to show that it's a label rather than a numerical value. So the quotation marks are to show that it's a text label. And what if it's false? What do I want to put in? Well, I suppose I could put in fail. Or I could just perhaps leave it if I don't want anything to show up there. It would put the word false if I put nothing. So I might put a space bar. Let's see what that does. All right, let's see if this works. And that one should have a space bar because I failed. So now let's copy it down and let's see what happens. I don't want to count the class. I just want to do this for the students. All right, so did it work that the 4 students who had the 4 students who had C or higher did get pass, and the other 2 just have that blank in there. All right, well, what else might I do with a decision then? I might, again, remember that it's not logical to have a class this small. If I had hundreds of students here, I might want to count how many of them passed. So I want to use a count formula. So how do we find all of the different function possibilities? Well, you would have to do a lot more study and practice. Almost any kind of function you could want are available, but we're going to count the number of students who passed. So you might say, well, how do I know where count is? And you could just start pulling down some of these pull down menus until you find count. But that might not be very practical. Under AutoSum, which is available even on your home ribbon, there's a choice for more functions, and it gives me a search option. So I'm going to type count, and when I hit return, it jumps to count, and notice that there are several different choices. I don't even know what all of these count options are. If I just choose the first one, it'll count the number of cells that contain numbers. So if you just want to count how many students have scores that are numerical, you could just use count. I want to use a logical decision here. I want to count if the value is equal to pass. So I'm going to choose the count if function, and I'm going to choose OK. And then it gives me this nice little wizard that helps me see what it is that we want to count. So let's see if I can get this out of the way, but still inside our video. So I'm in this cell right now, and what I want to do is count the number of passes that we see in this range. So for my range, I can click and drag. So from my column of whether the students passed or not, and my criteria here is if they equal, and I think there might be an option here, for text contains. Well, let me just see if I just put pass here. Do I need quotation marks is what I'm not sure about. We'll find out. We'll find out if I put the quotation marks. It does show me that my results are 4, so that looks like it's working fine. There's also an option for counting text, now that I remember that. This worked just fine. There are 4 students who passed. I can quickly see whether this is going to work the way I want to. I think I would like to pass this class, so I'm going to change my test grade here to a 99, and let's see what that changes. My letter grade to a B-, and now the number of students who've passed the class changes to a 5. Okay, so I think that's working pretty well, but for sake of honesty, I'll put my grade back to a 50. All right, lots of different logical decisions you could make then, and we need to get some practice on those. Very quickly then, the last things that we could do would be to do some formats. So for example, we can select this region, and on our home tab we can use the border choices. Let's do all borders, and we might make the outside border thick. So one of the choices, thick box border. I might choose these cells, and I might make it a double border underneath. I can of course change colors, so I could change the text in these. Let's maybe make them red. I could of course change the size of the cells or of the fonts. So you guys already know we can change the value of the cells. Let's do some more decision making. If I highlight these pass fail, I could go to conditional formatting, and I could highlight these cells based on a rule. I could highlight these cells if, and here's a choice that says text contains. So I'm going to highlight these cells if the text in them contains pass. And it says, do you want to make them light red with dark red text? And there's other choices here if you pull down, or you could go down and do custom format. So I'll go ahead and do the light red. So notice only those that passed have that conditional formatting. So again, if I change, let's see if we go down to a 50 test score, that person no longer passes. If I do a Control Z, it'll undo that and put it back the way it was. So you could do lots of different kinds of formatting. And one more conditional format. If you haven't already seen this, let's highlight all of the test grades. Well, let's do for the averages also. There's a very interesting conditional format that will give you data bars. And I'm going to choose gradient with the light color, and we'll see. Oh, I don't want to do all of them at the same time. Let me escape out of that, and I'll try and explain why I didn't want to do that. I noticed how small the bars were for these. I'm just going to do one at a time. This is only worth 15 points, so let me go back just to these and do conditional formatting data bars. Gradient fill, just so it's not so dark. And I'm going to choose yellow just so I can still see the text. Now you can see what it does. It's sort of a sideways bar graph. The two that have perfect scores of 15 are filled in all the way. The 7.5s are bar graphs that only go up halfway. So the reason I didn't want to do them all was because I didn't want to compare them all. So if I just do this column, now it's out of 20 points. So I want to do the same type of formatting. And the grades are pretty good there, so the bars go higher. And I'll do the same conditional formatting. You could choose different colors. I don't know how that would look. And I could do the same thing for the averages. So the conditional formatting, again, you might choose different colors, gradient only so that it doesn't get too dark. So you can see that my poor average of 50% gives me a much smaller bar. So if you're a visual person, you might like doing that conditional formatting. And there are a lot of choices of conditional formatting, so you could experiment with those. But this video has gotten plenty long. Hopefully you've gotten the idea that there are a lot of decisions that Excel can make, so that it's not just adding and subtracting numbers. Now I guess the only last thing I should do is I don't want you to print this letter grade scale. I want to see only this table. So if I could actually go down here and put my name somewhere. So put your name, student name here. And this is what I want to print. So I'm going to click and drag what I want to print. And then I'm going to go to the page layout ribbon and choose the print area. So whatever I have highlighted, if I click on set print area, you'll see that it's going to give you a dotted line here to show you. So the letter grade scale is not going to be printed. So now if you go to print a hard copy for me, and I do want you to print this without the grade scale, so it's going to come up with whatever printer. So when you're in the Door Lab, you'll want to print to the Door Lab, and notice how it's going to format, and the grade scale is not, it's not trying to put the grade scale on here. I think I asked in the directions for you to print it landscape orientation. Okay, so that would be what you can print. Now you can format it more nicely than I did, and with larger fonts and more different types of characters. But again, I don't want the video to get much longer.